Hi guys, and welcome to part 2 of this Adobe Illustrator for KDP tutorial video on creating patterns for our book covers. This is the example we'll be looking at today, and I'm going to show you how to create a slightly more complex pattern out of multiple elements, and I'm also going to give you a little bit of insight into my personal workflow, and hopefully that'll be helpful to some of you. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to hide this layer and create a new layer for myself to start with. So let's get started. I'm going to work with the same assets that I used in the last video. I'm going to choose a more playful skull this time. And so the first thing I'll do is I'm going to drag a couple of these onto my screen. And I'm going to show you something that I do almost always. Whenever I create my own symbol or my own asset, I'll create two versions of it. And the first one will have a solid background, and the second one will be completely transparent. And that's because I want to give myself some options on how to use these things. Now I'm going to go to my fill. I'm going to make sure fill is selected. And now when I click on a color, you'll see that it filled it in with that red. But it did something else that I didn't want it to do. And it filled in the black as well for the nose and for the eyes, right? And that's why I have this second transparent version over here. So what I'm going to do now with both of these selected is I'm going to go to my alignment panel, and I'm going to align these with their centers both vertically and horizontally. And you'll see now they're perfectly in place. I have a red background and I still have those black eyes and nose features on top. So while these are both selected, I'm going to hit Control G, hold Alt, and drag. I'm going to do that again, so I've created three skulls for myself. I'm going to come over to my Layers palette, and I'm going to select only the colored skull, not the transparent one that's on top. I'm going to change the color of one of these, and that's a little dark for my taste, so I'm going to double click on it to get the color picker, and I'm going to bring it up to this corner so that it's a brighter and, let's say, lighter blue. Okay, so that's a little bit better. And then let me click on this one up here, isolate just that colored version, and I'm going to change that to a yellow. So I'm giving myself a primary color scheme. I'm going to try and come up with something that I would like to turn into a pattern. Now, a lot of times people love things to be symmetrical and they just want to line everything up perfectly, but that's not always the best way to design. So let me show you what I mean. I'm going to use my arrow keys here to try and move this into place. And what I want to do is I'm going to create what's called an implied line. So I'm going to place this perfectly where this yellow skull is tucked right into the shape of this red skull, okay? And the result is that this curve seems to turn right into the curve of this yellow skull, giving us this sort of S shape. So now I'm moving this blue skull to do something similar. Now I don't want to fit it right into the exact same space, okay, because then we're back to being symmetrical here. But I do want to create another implied shape. Now I do want this blue one to be underneath the red one. So I'm going to go to Object, Arrange, and Send to Back. And you can see it's now in back of that red skull. Now I'm going to continue to move it around until it's, let's see, exactly where I want it. Let's see. Move it to the left. Right about there. And you'll see I did something similar, even though it's not even with the yellow one here. I've now created an implied line from this curve right through the curve on that leftmost tooth. The other thing I did is I created a tangent point between this circle for the eye and the top of this skull. You can see they meet at a point right about there. Okay, so now I'm going to create a bounding box around them, hit Control G, and now they're all grouped together. Hold down Shift and Alt like we normally do, and I'm going to shrink this down to a more manageable size. I'll move that up here. Okay, I'm going to shrink it down a little further actually. Right about there. Okay, so now I'm going to go to my swatches palette, and I'm just going to click and drag, drop it in place. I no longer need my artwork over here, so I'm going to hit delete. And now I'm going to create a rectangle to house our new pattern. Okay, and I want it to fit my canvas perfectly. There we go. Right now I still have that yellow chosen for the fill. So instead of that yellow, I'm going to click on my pattern, and it now fills that rectangle that we just made. Okay. So what I want to do now is I'm going to open up the options by double clicking on it. And once again, I'm going to play around with the spacing to make sure it's something that I like. Right off the bat, I know by creating this triangular composition that this is going to work well with the brick by column tile type, okay, because this red shape is going to fit well right into the space left by this blue and yellow shape. And then we just need to play around with the width and height of that spacing. So I know I'm going to want to add to that spacing. Whoops, I'm sorry, that's width. I meant to move the height because we're working with columns here. Okay, so using my up arrow key, I'm widening the space between my columns. And it may look like I'm creating too much white space, but I'm doing that intentionally because now I'm going to go to the width and I'm going to shrink that space down so that the shapes fit right into each other horizontally. And again, I'm looking at this white space and trying to create an interesting looking shape out of that white space. Okay, and I like the way that looks, so I'm going to click Save a Copy, and it's going to give me an additional pattern down here in my swatches palette. That's a good way to scale your cover designs. And now I'm going to click Done. And you'll see there is my pattern. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my symbols, my skull symbols, and I'm going to drag this white one into place. Okay, I'm going to break the link, and then I'm going to move it around and make sure that the complicated shapes that we create, the white shapes, and any shape we make by combining all these skulls, looks interesting. So I'm watching the way this white skull overlaps with all the shapes around it. And so I'm just using my arrow keys and moving it around until all those shapes intersect each other in a way that's pleasing to look at. And I think I like that right there. It's not completely centered, and I want to center my skull, so I'm actually going to move my skull this way till it's about the center of the rectangle. And then I'm going to go and move my pattern to now fit with where I placed that skull. So once again, I'm going to go to my Layers palette. I'm going to click on the rectangle that has my pattern. Go back to Object, Transform, Move. And I want it to move left. So I'm going to put a -0.1. And then I'm going to move this thing in increments. Vertical, I want it to be 0. And I have it on preview, so I already did it. Now, I don't want to transform the objects. I only want to transform the pattern itself. I'm going to click on preview again, and you'll see that only my pattern moved. And I like the way that looks, so I'm going to click OK. Okay. Now I'm going to click Control D and just make sure it's exactly where I want it. And I do like it right about there. And so we are going to call this design done, at least for now. Let me click away so you can see the whole thing. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them below the video on YouTube or in the Facebook group. Hopefully this was helpful, and have a good night.